I'm Julie Fei Fan Balzer, and today's twist is taking inspiration from one art form and transforming it over to another. So here's the deal. I made this quilt. I love it, but it took me forever, and it was a lot of labor, and maybe you don't want to sew. But if you love this quilt, or if you see something in a museum that you love or at a gallery that you love, how can you translate it into something that you can easily make? Well, that's where today's project comes in, because you can see that this is paper and it was so much quicker and easier to make, and yet it has so many of the same qualities that you see in the original. So what is our first step? We want to look at our original piece and really think about what it is that dominates. So the first thing I notice when I look at the quilt is the trees. So let's go ahead and make those trees. Now, the good news is it's really easy to do. So what you want to do is you want to gather whatever paper you have. So it could be, scrapbook paper, it could be paper that you've printed. These are pages from an old magazine. Okay, you could use, I think, the maps, book pages, you know what I mean? Whatever it is that you want, just grab all your favorite papers. So what I have here is two papers that are about the same size. And you just have to decide which one is going to be the background and which one is going to be the tree. So whichever one is going to be the tree, now stay with me, this is going to get confusing, is actually going to be the one we don't cut. So I'm going to leave the book page alone. The one that's going to be the background is this painted one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it to create the beginning of my tree. So you can see that tree starting right there, okay? That's obviously the trunk. Now the branches are going to come this way. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that. And you can see there's our first branch. Now I want the branch on the other side not to be exactly the same, but maybe a little bit off. So I will cut that apart here. And now you can see the beginnings of our tree starting to form. Now you can have additional branches coming off in different directions. And again, you're just sort of eyeballing it, not worrying too much. This is very much like improv quilting. We're improv collaging. But you can play around and decide how detailed you want it, how simple you want it, totally up to you, however you want it to be. But take a look, and you can spread this all around. You could also decide you want the book text to be right side up, wrong side up. You could switch it out for another piece of paper. It's really whatever you want. Once you're satisfied with the arrangement, you want to use some kind of adhesive. I like to use a gel medium, but you could use a liquid glue or even just a dry adhesive, whatever you really like. So I am using a heavier gel medium and a stiff brush. That's the way that I found is easiest to really get a good seal. What I do is I apply it directly to the paper because I think that it's gonna dry clear, so you're not even gonna notice it. Then I can take my first piece, and this becomes like the first piece of a puzzle. Everything else will get placed based off where this first piece is. And I do put a layer of glue on top, and you can always lift up any edges. It's one of the reasons I'm working on some palette paper today. Palette paper is a sort of non-stick surface that's meant to be used as a paint palette, but it works great as a work surface when you're gluing things. Now you can see that some of the paint and ink from this piece of painted paper is coming off onto the book page, totally fine. So like I said, this is the first puzzle piece. So I know that this is the straight line of the trunk. So it means for this next piece, I know that that is also has to be in a straight line. So I simply eyeball it to say, is that trunk look like it's going in the right place? And it does. And then it's just a process of adding more glue under and more glue over, okay? So this is a really, really easy thing to do. And you can see that as you keep going and using each puzzle piece to make sure you have your straight lines, eventually what you'll have is a tree that looks something like this one here. And if you have pieces like this that aren't quite glued, you can absolutely glue those down later. It's not a big deal. Now it's kind of messy looking, right? It has all these raggy edges and stuff hanging off. So you can either trim it by hand Or if we look at the finished piece for a second, you'll see because that needs to be a nice sort of quilt that's squared up, we're gonna do what quilters do and square it up. And for that, we're gonna use a paper trimmer. So the way that I like to do this is I like to flip it to the back because from the front, it's very hard to see where the edges are. So I flip it over to the back. And then when I slip it in the paper trimmer, I can kind of see where the blade is gonna cut, okay? So then I can determine exactly where it needs to go. And then just like squaring up a quilt, once you have one edge cut, so I know that this edge is straight, then I can go ahead and push this up against the edge of the paper trimmer and know that I'm getting a perfectly rectangular piece because that one edge is straight. So I'm just gonna keep trimming this off, and I will soon have a very neat and clean, I might even flip it this way, to go ahead and get that right there. And it's amazing how easily this comes away, and you'll see that our tree will emerge a beautiful, clean square, which is just, or rectangle, which is exactly what we need. Look at that. Isn't that perfect? And it's the beginning of our collage. Now, I made some others just so you could see that you could do it with, this is an advertisement that has now a very Christmassy feeling tree. This one was done, you can see, with a photo of a woman's face, which has a really fun kind of look. Or even this one, which I think kind of feels Halloweeny and spooky just because we used a black piece of paper back here instead of anything else. But once you have your first piece, the next thing is to look back at your inspiration piece and see what else is inspiring you. So for me, I notice all the flying geese. Now, if you're not familiar with flying geese, essentially what they are these triangles. Now, they are twice as wide as they are tall. So to make them, what you need is 2 pieces of paper that are about the same width. That's the most important part. They don't have to be the same length, just the same width. So once I have these pieces of paper that are the same width, what I want to do is, I know this is 2 inches wide, so I want to, and I've already made the marks here, I want to go ahead and divide it into 1-inch increments and put a center line. Once that's done, then it's so easy to make the flying geese. It's way easier than when you're sewing. You're gonna snip apart on these lines just like this. And again, you could use the paper trimmer if you wanted to be super exact, but I like the homemade feel of it. Then you can see I have the center line drawn here, so I know that that's the point of the triangle. So I'm just going from point to end. Let me show you that one more time. I'm going from the edge to the point, because again, I drew that center line. And then you can see how easily you have your shapes. All you need to do is flip them over. You'll glue them down using that same gel medium, and it's the same process. You dip the brush, put a little bit of glue on, place the piece of paper, and generally the weight of the gel medium corresponds to the weight of the paper. So this is heavy paper, so I'm using a heavy gel medium. If you were using really thin, like wrapping paper or something like that, then you would want to use a really thin, like matte medium or something like that. So I'm just going to keep putting that on, and once that is completely done, I will have something that looks like this. So this looks identical, basically, to the flying geese that you can see on my quilt. So it's perfect for creating my collage. And you can see you can make them lots of different sizes. So now it is time to put our collage together, which is super easy to do. You can see how you can just lay out whatever your focal image is, put it wherever you want. Then you can place in your flying geese image. Okay, and then you can see, just like in our scrappy quilt here, you might want to lay in a couple little pieces, right, to make this start to look like a collage. And I would just adhere all these little pieces down, okay, trim away the excess, and what you will be left with is this beautiful paper quilt. So don't be afraid if you can't sew, because you can find inspiration from sewing and take it on over into your paper projects.